Thank you. Good evening. We're calling this meeting into order now. It is 7:01 on December 5th, 2022. And this is a public meeting of the City of Portland's Police Accountability Subcommittee on Officer Accountability. Oh, it looks like Gabriela and Christopher are our Spanish interpreters. Can you please read the Spanish interpretation?
Esta cita tiene interpretación en inglés y español, y si quieren interpretación en español, solo escojan el botón que dice español en el globito. Y que esta cita es pública, y vamos a continuar.
Thank you. This is a city, the city also offers ASL interpretation, which is being provided by Mary and Aaron today. Please pin their video feed to see their interpretation throughout the meeting. Finally, the closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance. Please note that this is an automatic captioning service and it isn't always accurate. The city supports access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other languages or other language support as well. Please email in advance of future public meetings, either as a response to a public meeting notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for other access assistance, including interpretation in other languages. This is a public meeting and is subject to the City of Portland's Administrative Code and Oregon State law, and is being recorded. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for the commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be asked to use the Zoom Q&A feature. As the commissioners are presenting and are discussing things, if attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversation during the meeting and future meeting and agenda topics. We like to be clear that not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both the question and the answer will be visible to you and will become part of the meeting record. To access this feature, just click on the Q&A icon in the middle of your screen. I guess we'd like to go into the Atlantic acknowledgement portion of our meeting. Thank you. And I'll pass this on to the co-chairs.
Yes, Commissioner Charlie Michelle Wesley, co-chair of the powers and duties phase of the Police Accountability Commission. The PAC has been asked to honor and request from the city for a moratorium on land acknowledgements and honored that request. We are happy to see that the city now displays land acknowledgement in City Hall and can resume giving one. And I have asked Commissioner Dan Handelman to please present the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, co-chair. I am Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I am the other co-chair of this subcommittee and a member of the full commission. And I'm just going to preface reading this by saying this is not exactly what I would say if I were to write my own land acknowledgement. But we are using the city's version to make sure that we're within their guidelines. We acknowledge that the rivers, lakes, streams, and lands of the lower Willamette River rest upon the occupied territories of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Calumet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes. We recognize the many villages, traditions, cultures, and relationships that existed along the river since time immemorial. We recognize these tribes stewarded these lands and rivers since time immemorial for future generations. We recognize and undertake responsibility for the destruction of the river and land, of traditional food sources, sacred places, and multifaceted ways of life. We acknowledge the economic and social values that enabled the harm to the river including systemic racism, classism, and other systems of oppression that perpetuated harm against Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities along the river. With this acknowledgement, we commit to honoring and learning from the past and working towards a more equitable and sustainable future for the lower Willamette River. We commit to seeking solutions that acknowledge the inequities of past socioeconomic policies and the harm done to people and our relationships to these lands and waters.
Thank you, Commissioner Handelman. Can we have the slides back up, please? So we are going now to our community agreements. I'll just ask the commissioners to take a moment to read this. And when considering the community agreements, the one that I'll pull out this evening is allow those who participate in different ways or have types of participation or tasks that they are responsible for to fulfill their roles. So just keeping that in mind while we're working together today. And thank you. And for this page, keep in mind that everyone has their own truth. So just another community agreement to kind of keep in mind while we're working with each other today. Do we all commit to the following community agreements for today's meeting and to gently call in our colleagues and collaborators if needed? I'm good with that. Okay, I guess we can move on. Thank you. I will pass it over to the co-chairs to discuss the timeline.
Okay, I'm still Commissioner Charlie Michelle Wesley, she, her pronouns. This meeting is a part of the Police Accountability Commission's powers and duties phase of work. It is expected to go on into January and will end when all three of this phase's outcome documents are approved. This is the first of several phases in which the PAC will directly begin deciding what will go into the recommendations the PAC will send to City Council for a new police accountability system, including the new oversight board. The phase focuses on the functions of the new system. Future phases of work will develop the form of the new system as well as how it relates to the rest of the city government and the transition plan from our current system to the new one before Commission presents all proposed changes to the City Council in 2023 for their consideration and approval. Okay. Following today, here are the next few meetings of the PAC. The Subcommittee on Officer Accountability will have a longer work session on Saturday, December 10th, and another meeting December 19th. The Subcommittee on Access to Information meets December 12th with a briefing from Independent Police Review. It also meets December 29th. The Subcommittee on Structural Oversight will meet on December 15th. And finally, the full commission meets this Thursday, December 8th. This slide is the current project plan for the powers and duties phase of the Police Accountability Commission's work. It will be updated as needed throughout this phase of work. This slide is for members of the public to be able to understand how the commission gets from now through the end of the phase, which focuses on identifying the areas of agreement among commission members as to the functions of the new system. today's meeting is part of right there in the green box with the red border in the left part of the screen where it says, can you make it a little bit larger? Continues discussion and testimony, develops and revises documents under the December heading. Thank you. This slide shows the outcomes documents for the powers and duties phase based on the agenda and scope approved by the commission. These documents each correspond to one of the subcommittees. One document will focus on how the new system will access needed information to do its work. The second on how it will handle administrative misconduct allegations against individual officers, and the third on how it will contribute to structural oversight of the Police Bureau. And review of today's meeting purpose. Today's meeting agenda includes a discussion of the co-chair's outline on officer accountability. And actually, I'm going to ask Commissioner and Co-Chair Dan Handelman to take it from here.
Thank you. Yeah, so the discussion today includes this outline that we have that includes research that came from the last phase, and we're going to discuss what work has been done since the last meeting and what we want to see. Broadly speaking, we're not ready to write every line yet, but what we want to see in the outcome document. We will do an overview of the city code language that relates to police accountability, the current city code, and then we may or may not assign some tasks for people to do, but we certainly are going to talk about what we're going to do at the December 10 work session. And then there's going to be public comment before the end, so I see there's a couple of people in the audience now. Want to welcome you to be here tonight. We appreciate having people attending the meetings, and one is actually a fellow commissioner. So, all right, that concludes this part of the slide.
Thank you. So I'm assuming that the co-chairs will be going through the walkthrough now. Just allow me to facilitate when needed, and there will be a weighted stack.
So before we do the walk, we were going to do a little introduction to the walkthrough.
Oh, okay, perfect.
So maybe we can have everybody's face on the screen while we're doing this little introduction. Oh, thank you very much. Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. So this is our first kind of putting pen to paper kind of part of our process since we started this commission a year ago. So it's kind of an exciting phase to be in. We are in a unique position that we have basically the guts of what is this system going to do when there's misconduct and they have the board's going to have it investigated. We have been taking public input since we started, pretty much every meeting, and there were a couple of community engagement events that happened this past month in November, and people put in a few words here and there that I think are going to be informative before we make our decisions about what we want to say this is going to look like. So Commissioner Michelle Wesley and I talked a little bit about making sure to incorporate that public engagement input as we go through this phase. We did promise the public that we're going to do that, in our value statements that we made when we first started as a commission. So we don't have that prepared tonight, but I'm hoping to have it before Saturday. So just remember that we're responsive to the community that voted for this ballot measure, and so part of our decision making includes not only our fellow commissioners but also what our fellow Portlanders want. Does that everybody think that's a agreeable statement? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so that being said, so what we did, last time we had this document, but now we're going to go through it in more detail. So this is the outline of basically the 6 different aspects of the officer accountability process that we need to make decisions about. So if you can pull that back up again, there's a table of contents at the top, for one headline for each of those 6 stages. 2 of the stages, appeals and mediation, were stuff that we added to what's kind of written, but they're part of this complaint process. And I guess it's really when we're doing this, I want to make sure people feel free to jump in. If you see something along the way that you disagree with, or that you think we should pull out, or that something that is missing that we need to add, you have to remember that these the pieces that are in this document came from the research phase. So it's only if we ran across it in another city, or if it was something that we said was a hindrance or something good in the current system, that put them in here. And there are things that are in the current system, which we're going to address a little later, that didn't make it in here. So I might make little side notes to that as we go through this. So just what I guess what I'm saying is, feel free to raise your hand if you want to say something during this walkthrough. And my plan is to do this kind of the way that the research subcommittee did the documents that we voted on, and just kind of read the headline and let you look at the information that's squeezed in under those headlines. And those sometimes are contradictory to each other, or not exactly the same as each other because they're from different jurisdictions. We're not debating tonight which one we want. We're going to work on that in the work session on Saturday. But if there's something that sticks out to you that says, well, I don't think we should do that, this is a good time to say that. Fair enough? Okay. Are you with me still? I see some nodding off going on. Okay. So let's start with intake, shall we? And the first item here is advocates. So I'm already going to break script here, because we talked in the commission about the importance of having an advocate to walk somebody through the system from the time they file the complaint through the very end. Because you may remember the current system only provides, it's not even really an advocate, it's an appeals process advisor, but for the sake of argument, we'll call it an advocate. They only provide that if you file a complaint, get it investigated, don't like the outcome, and file an appeal. But we want to make sure that people get that advocate, I think, at the beginning. I think that's the sense that I got from our previous discussions as a full commission. So we, on the subcommittee, should have a longer discussion of what that looks like. We can talk a little bit about it now on Saturday. So I'm going to read the headline that we pulled from the research document from the jurisdictions R5. It says, the investigative process is structured to be accessible for all involved and supportive of the complainants navigating the process. And then if you want to take a look at the examples that are there, basically it's talking about support people and attorneys. So here's one of the things, and we don't necessarily have to work this out in this phase, but the thing that I struggle with is somebody calls in and let's say they're a member of the LGBTQ community, and they feel that the officer was, said something homophobic and that was inappropriate, and they want to have somebody from their community advocate for them. When some person answered on the other end of the phone, it could be the make or break moment. Like if that person can't turn them over to somebody that they want to talk to, or is not culturally sensitive to their concerns, they might not even get through the complaint part of the process, right? So that, I want us to think about advocates and how that, how that will work and how that can work for everybody. Does anybody have anything that they want to add, starting with my co-chair, Commissioner Michelle Wesley, if you have something you want to add first?
Well, I just wanted to make a comment as I was going through the community input, that there were several requests for advocates to walk them through various processes of the current Police Accountability Commission. That's what's missing hugely.
Great. And I see Commissioner Iona.
So I just checked back quickly on my write-up of Seattle. And there was a little thing in there about how they did that complainant satisfaction research and came out with the conclusion that they wanted to have a complaint navigator.
Are you
Or
still there?
people who me?
Yeah, you cut out for a second. Go on.
Oh, okay. It seems like that what you're describing, there are people who the complainant knows or hires. Is that the Seattle example? Sounds like they actually will have a paid employee who helps the complainants navigate. And I was
Right.
wondering, yeah.
So can we have the staff, or can you add that in to that, to the document?
And I'm not quite sure if Seattle's already implemented this. This was the outcome of that research they did on complainant satisfaction. And so, but it sounded like that was where they were headed. I don't know if they ever got there, but I think this is an idea we should consider.
Okay. Great. Does anybody else have input on the idea of advocates? You know, whether it's how to have a stable of advocates, or how somebody's going to answer the phone and figure out who's going to be there. We got one of the responses we got from the public last time we brought this up was that 911 has to deal with that. I was thinking about we might also want to talk to something like the I think it's called Lines for Life now. It used to be the Women's Crisis Hotline. You know, they probably have the same kind of thing where they don't know exactly who's going to be on the other end of that call. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody else, so let's move on to the next one whenever the staff is done typing this idea. Okay, timelines to file. All right, so item T4 from the jurisdictions was the allowable time after an incident in which a civilian can file a complaint is large enough to ensure access to community and able to be extended. So in other words, don't just say you have to file it within 2 weeks or something like that. So you can take a look at some of the examples from other cities. Anybody have anything they want to add, subtract, or comment on? Again, I'll start with my co-chair and then open it up to everybody else about timelines.
I'm seeing everyone shaking their heads. No.
Yeah, okay. Groovy, the next one, who can file? And in parentheses, it says third party / anonymous, age, immigration status, and those are some of the characteristics that are described in these other cities. So jurisdictions T1 said the oversight system includes a broad definition of who can file complaints alleging police misconduct. And you know, this DC says the parents of children. Some of them talk about people who witness it. Some of them talk about people who are you know, can remain anonymous. But there are and that, well, actually, that's under T3. So in T3, the oversight agency has provisions to accept anonymous complaints. So let's look at those together. And again, you know, I'm going to give you a second to read those. I'm again going to start with my co-chair before going to everybody else. Okay. Does anybody else have feedback about who is allowed to file? I think the one that strikes me is the San Diego County one, where it specifically says it's absolute and unconditional, and you can file regardless of age, citizenship, residence, criminal record, or other characteristics, including incarceration status. So I think that's very powerful.
I see co-chair Charlie, and then Commissioner Catherine.
Just a real quick question. Can an inmate file a complaint?
We
Do you
can,
know?
we can make that be possible. It says including incarceration status in San Diego County.
Oh,
If we
yeah,
wanna-
okay. Yeah,
Want to incorporate that into our plan on when we're starting to write this on Saturday? Let's do that. And is that it? Okay, Commissioner McDowell.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that Chicago has this quite a lot of focus on this issue because they historically did not allow complaints to go forward unless they were verified. And, you know, so obviously you could not, if you had to swear to the complaint, you couldn't have an anonymous complaint go forward. And because so many complaints would then not go forward, they decided to change the process. So in Chicago now, any complaint that is not verified can still be reviewed by the oversight board as a part of reviewing systemic issues, not individual officer accountability. So in that sense, it's outside the scope of what we're doing. But then the director of the oversight board can also go to the police chief and override the requirement of a ask for an override of the requirement for a verified complaint. So if the police chief, if the oversight board director recommends it and the police chief agrees to it, then an anonymous non-verified complaint can go forward in Chicago. And that was a significant change after about 10 years of controversy.
Thank you for that. Does anybody else have anything to add? Or Oriana Bauer, you haven't said anything yet tonight. Oh, I see the staff has hand up.
Yeah, just a quick note that this did come up, the question about that you mentioned, Co-Chair Dan, about parents of children at a full commission meeting. And I believe it was Commissioner Jason in the full commission meeting who flagged that that would require determining if there was an age cutoff for that. And just in case that is something that the subcommittee wishes to pursue, that was a note that we flagged for a later conversation.
Okay, great. Well, that's in T1 under Washington, D.C. That's where that is. If you want to, make a little note connected to that, parents of minors. Make a complaint. Yeah, maybe just flag that with a little note. All right, I want to try to keep us moving along. Our plan is to finish this part of the discussion by 8:05 and then come back for a little further discussion after the break. So when you're ready, staff, ways to file complaints. This was something that wasn't in the flow chart that we were originally given, but T2 in the research documents of jurisdictions said the complaint process is inclusive and offers multiple methods as well as accommodations to ensure access. So it talks about the ways that people can file complaints, that there's translation available, that there's mail, there's phone, there's email, there's fax if anybody still uses that. There's walk-ins, there's all sorts of possible ways. And a lot of these are things that happen in Portland already. And then the counterexamples have to do with the limited hours. So if you want to read those for a second and see if there's anything you want to add, subtract, or suggest. I'm going to keep starting with co-chair Michelle Wesley. There you are with your hand up. Go ahead.
I can't read that fast, so maybe I passed over it. But what about filing a complaint through a third party?
Through a third party. Yeah. I never thought it. So third party complaints, I think in the previous section was describing a, like if you were not part of the incident, but you saw it and you wanted to file. But that's an interesting idea to have somebody file it on your behalf.
Mm-hmm.
Like you'd still be participating, we'd be hanging in the background, you're saying. Yeah,
Yes.
So let's add that as a note up there as well.
Commissioner Christian, or did you want to speak? Or
Sure. I had a quick question that I was kind of going back and forth on whether I should ask it or if it's too obvious. But the phone bit on ways to file complaints, does that include a text option, or is it just email? I don't know. I didn't see anything about a text option. I don't know if we need a text option. I'm just curious if that's something that we should consider, or if people would want to consider that.
Okay, let's put a note there.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these language was written before people were texting widely, probably. That's, you know, as I said, there's the thing for faxing, so.
Mhm. And that would help with people that don't, talk.
Yeah, that was my
Yeah.
thought. Yeah.
And 911 has texting now, so.
Yeah. Mhm.
All right, anybody else have anything to add to the ways to file a complaint section? Okay. Providing information to complainants. So this is, we talked a little bit about this in the co-chair meeting earlier today, that access to information is another one of the subcommittees, but we're talking about, that's mostly talking about the board's access, the board and the investigators and the staff's access to information. So we're talking about the access that the people who are filing complaints or are the subjects of the complaints would have to information. So T5 from the jurisdiction says complainants receive a record of their complaint, including a notice of completion of the investigation. There's several examples there. I guess I'm going to just make a quick note here. It says in San Diego you have to ask for your paperwork in order to get it, like they don't just send it to you. When I was reading through the IPR code, I never realized this after all these years of doing it. It explicitly says that IPR cannot charge people for investigating their complaints. So I think that's a good idea to think about for later. So maybe we just put a little note there. I know we're going to get back to it later, but while I'm thinking about it. Anybody have anything to add? I'm going to again start with co-chair Michelle Wesley about receiving records of complaints or complainants. All right. Anybody else? Mr. Oriana Bauer, I see your screen, your window is lit up. I mean, you're talking.
I was going to say, Commissioner Charlie would like.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Change my mind. There's somewhere where it says like, if you have an advocate, they can access records.
Oh, we should add that there.
Mm-hmm.
That's very important. So the current, appeals process advisor we talked about before is usually a former citizen review committee member who's gone through all the city rigmarole, and they can access the files, but the complainant can't. So that's just a little side note. All right, Commissioner Oriana Bauer.
Just curious that on this, I didn't see / still don't see the specific method by which I might be missing it, but the specific method by which the updates would be received. I don't know if we should specify like that there's options, like you can receive it by phone or email or mail. I see that it says brochures and whatnot, which seems like it'd be physical, but I'm not sure if there's other ways of doing it. Sorry.
No, that's good. It's good. Staff, we might want to add that to the next section, R6. I kind of feel like maybe we should read the headlines together on these. Talks about complainants have access to case information online, right? And that's in New York only. And there is some kind of tracking here in Portland. I'm not even sure what exactly the complainants can look at. So that's maybe something that maybe we can flag that for IPR, a question for IPR about what exactly the complainants here in Portland have access to. Okay, anybody else? Trying to balance between having a healthy discussion and moving forward. Okay, Commissioner Iona.
Seems like, not everybody has online access, and I wonder if like maybe our new agency could like send postcards at benchmarks for people who don't have online access. So some sort of alternative.
I think that staff typed that in as a, expansion of.
Something to talk about, yeah. Thanks.
Good, thank you. All right, if it's okay, I want to move on to the next section, the types of complaints. All right, so there's the next thing I think on the agenda, it says things that we missed. So I'm going to say before we start this section that we didn't talk about incidents that aren't complaints that come in, right? So we're talking about how to accommodate the complainants, but let's say that a person's been shot or killed, or there's something in the media or something that, the staff sees on YouTube or, whatever, that where the person didn't file a complaint, but the new board says, wow, we got to investigate this and see what's going on. So we have to make sure that we keep that in this. So I would think maybe under that headline that says types of misconduct the board should investigate, maybe we can just add, cases that don't necessarily come from a complaint. That's my own comment. All right, so now bear with me, folks, fellow commissioners, as I'm going to read all the headlines and see if that works, and we'll double back up to the top. And that's going to be a lot of reading for you of the subpoints, but I think that way you'll get a better idea of what's in this whole category. So in the experts document, H1, it says some categories of cases should be defined for automatic investigation. And I guess that is essentially what I was just talking about. So it is in there in a sense. B2 says the oversight body has authority to receive all complaints, even about items that they might have investigative authority over. B3, this is also from jurisdictions, the oversight body has defined authority over, at minimum, alleged misconduct directly affecting the public. Okay, so you can scroll down to the next header, and then we'll go back up and let people read the dots. Okay, that's it. All right, so scroll back up. All right, so if you people would read H1 and B2, and then we'll scroll down for B3 in a second. People ready for it to scroll? I think everybody's deep in reading. Okay, is it all right to scroll it down now? Okay. If you would, staff, scroll down for B3. This is a long one. Are you able to extend the screen vertically at all, staff, or no?
Not enough to get everything, but more.
Okay. Ooh. All right, so I'm gonna again start with my co-chair and see if you have anything to add to this broad section about what kind of cases the board should investigate.
Not at this time.
Okay. I mean, I think we have a big smorgasbord here of different kinds of things, and there's things that are in the charter, but there may be things we want to add from the ideas that we get from these other cities. Anybody else have something that you want to add? Commissioner McDowell first, maybe? Tell me.
I would say Commissioner Christian, then Commissioner McDowell.
Right.
Cool. Thank you. I had two quick thoughts / questions. One was For the complaints that we receive that are not, that don't fall within, I forget the way it's phrased, but that don't fall within our categories of investigation, I guess. Is there a provision that says what would happen to those complaints? Because if we're not investigating them, does it somewhere else in the document it specify? I apologize. I read through the document, but this is around where I started skimming instead of deep reading. So I start to lose a little bit after this point. So I apologize if it's later in the document, but I just want to check that. And then my second question was the B3. To me, it just reads as a setting like a minimum baseline of what we have authority over. I just want to make sure that that's my understanding is correct on that one. Those are the only two things. Thank you.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think that's a good idea to put to flag that. I think the staff had their hand up for a second, was just to flag that question: what happens to something that falls outside the jurisdiction? I think there may be something elsewhere about that, but
yeah, I don't believe it's in this document, but it isn't, I believe, in the other jurisdictions. I'll pull it up and verify.
Commissioner McDowell?
Thank you. I'm not quite sure how to categorize this and whether it falls within one of the categories we've already listed, but we certainly heard comments throughout the last year about concerns about officers being involved in white supremacist groups and other groups that would suggest a bias toward folks of color and an inability to police in an impartial manner. So I'm not sure whether that falls within one of the categories we have, but I think we, if possible, should try to incorporate that.
Okay, let's make a note of that. Anybody else have anything to add for this types of complaints? Right, I mean, that's presuming that complaint comes from a community member. So then the next section says current model, including bureau complaints versus community complaints. And we didn't really have any examples of what happens to bureau complaints, which in Portland, that means if there's no community member involved, right? So what if a commander finds that the officer is involved in white supremacy, or what if one officer sexually harasses another officer? These are things that are totally bureau involved. So one of the things I would like to flag here under bureau complaints versus community complaints is to raise the very giant question: is there any reason to continue having an internal affairs division at the police bureau? Right? Should the new board investigate all complaints, including ones that come from police officers? And I think we revisit during the break. I'll revisit the charter to see that I'm pretty sure that would be legitimate under the charter, but we'll double check that. Does anybody else have a thought about that bureau complaints thing? And again, we're writing it broadly now. We're going to narrow it down on Saturday. Okay, so let's look at the barriers document. Portland 6.
Commissioner McDowell and
thank
staff.
you. Yes.
Thank you. So I was just going to add that I think that there's a good argument that our authority should be broad in the scope of what we investigate. This commission should be broad because the budget is significant, and it strikes me that the budget, the fact that the budget is what it is, 5%, suggests that would be, that it, at least there's an argument that contemplated us superseding all of the existing system, including internal affairs.
Okay. Staff, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, and I'm going to finish typing after that. Commissioner Catherine's comment. In the other jurisdictions document, and Commissioner Christian, as well as the question in the Q&A from Commissioner Jason, does B2, is that what you were essentially referring to earlier? This is the oversight body has authority to receive all complaints, even about items it may not have investigative authority over. And the examples do include the case of Chicago, which forwards the complaints to the appropriate investigative entity, whatever that may be. And if that ends up being always the oversight body, then this becomes a moot point. But if there are other entities that continue to exist that investigate too, does that address the question?
Yeah, for me it does. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and that is actually pasted into the outline that we're looking at.
Oh.
But yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So getting back to okay, so underneath this, the community member versus Bureau complaints, a barrier here in Portland 6 says there are direct barriers to participation based on people's ability, housing status, mental health, socioeconomic status, and more. So this is just some of the problems from the current system.
Commissioner, Co-Chair Dan, okay, I just wanted to make sure that the hand for the staff there wasn't another question or something. So sorry about that, continue.
Okay, and there's some logistical barriers there and usability barriers listed. And then Portland 7, it says burdensome parts of the accountability system disproportionately impact community members who are part of historically excluded groups. Maybe we have something to add or suggestions of something to take out of this list. Starting with my co-chair again. No. Reading.
I don't see any other hands.
Did you see a hand?
No, no other hands.
Oh, okay. Are people done? Yeah, I'm going to encourage people to do a more in-depth reading between now and Saturday, because I want to try to get through the rest of this, if we can, in the next 15 minutes. I don't think it's going to happen. Investigations. So referral of criminal investigations. Oh, so that was, to me, Commissioner Oriana Bauer, this was what your question was, that if there's something that is not a misconduct complaint, but it's actually a crime, that's where it's referred to. So referring criminal investigations. B5, the board has authority to send cases to the district attorney, grand jury, or other authority for criminal investigation. Do we have any questions or comments about that? It's only one item. All right, list of basic elements for misconduct investigation. And so Portland, the current system, number 8, talks about the investigative process. And talks about one of the barriers being that if the investigator is an officer or a former officer, that could be a problem for the community members, which kind of leads back to the question about internal affairs, and also the question about a question that we're going to have to deal with later about who staffs board. R3, are the jurisdictions. Investigations must follow established guidelines. And there's some examples of the guidelines there. And R4, investigators must gather evidence, including video evidence, and conduct and record interviews. I can't see it right now. I don't have my document pulled up. Is there more to that section? Staff? Yes, T6, also from the jurisdictions, incomplete or unverified complaints can be investigated if the oversight body determines investigation is warranted. And that kind of goes back to what Commissioner McDowell was talking about before, with the chief being able to override certain things. And then finally, in Portland, in the current system document, review and rigor. So this was the part that the commission found to be good. There's rigor, including finishing the investigation, even if the person resigns, kind of thing. So if you I think I'm not going to have staff scroll back, I'm just gonna ask broadly if, in general, these topics if there's anything people have that they want to add, subtract, or suggest. Commissioner, Co-Chair Michelle Wesley first. You get first dibs, okay? Anybody else have stuff? If you want to just scroll back up so we can see what the headers were again. Investigations must follow established guidelines, must gather evidence. And so this is kind of just a checklist of what people need to do during an investigation. And if you can scroll down again, the T6 is about the incomplete ones, and then the review and rigor. Anybody want to add anything to this before I plow us through to the next part?
I see that's a negative. Everyone's shaking their head. I think you can move on.
Now, we'll scroll on. Timelines to complete the investigation. So before we talk about the timeline to file, this is the timeline to complete the investigation. R1, this is from jurisdictions. Presumptive timeline is 180 days or less. And that that's the timeline right now in Portland under the DOJ agreement. But there are exceptions that can be made, and that's R2 says the timeline to complete may be extended. And I get, again, my commentary on that is that that's really important because there are some places where the police union has negotiated that if you don't finish it within a certain time, that the officers assume not to be guilty. And I think certainly these are good paired together, trying to get it done in 180 days, but being able to extend it. People have time to look that one over. My co-chair has her hand up already. Go ahead.
So I'm curious where it says, in New York, that they can halt an investigation, but then reopen it later. Do we know how much later? Or is that something that should be in there?
Yeah, well, I think I did that research. I don't know if I had that information, I might have put it in there. It may be something we can find out, but it also may just be something that we want to design for our own system.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it came up in the community input. They had something like 30 years, let's keep things available for 30 years, but
I think it depends on how serious it is. Well, why don't we highlight and make a note there saying what's the, outside timeline for that. There's no statute of limitations on murder. So I would think if it's a deadly force complaint, anybody else have something to add or ask or subtract or complain about? I'm not seeing any reactions. All right, let's scroll on to the next thing. Stipulated discipline. Okay, so I'm prefacing this section by saying the commission was stuck on this item when we were trying to put it into the possible best practices or things to consider document. I think that it has a lot to do with how it was presented in the first place, and that we didn't have a real good, thorough framework to work with. So I pasted in what we wrote, and I'm just bearing that in mind. I'm not trying to contradict what was said in the full commission, but I want to have this subcommittee consider this. And this is the one thing where I asked staff if we can switch over to the IPR document and look at what's done in Portland now. So before we get into a discussion about the languages here, can you do that, Stephanie? Pull that up. So stipulated discipline. No, it's in IPR, I believe. Oh, maybe you're right. Maybe it isn't police review board. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to read this into the record, just be really clear with everybody. This is the way things work in Portland now, and this was, again, something that the DOJ prescribed, that they should come up with a system for this. The following categories of cases are not eligible for stipulated findings, which means stipulated findings as a reminder, is where the cop says, I did it. I did exactly what the person says I did. Whatever the punishment is, I'll take it. Don't do an investigation. We don't have to have all this extra rigmarole. I'll just, I'll take my couple of days off, whatever. So that's what stipulated discipline is. So it says, cases involving alleged use of excessive force are not eligible. Cases involving alleged discrimination, disparate treatment, or retaliation are not available for that. Officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths are not available for that. And where the chief or the commissioner in charge doesn't agree, I mean, that may be the board in our case, but that's where it works currently. So that I'm hoping that puts at ease the people who are uncomfortable with the idea of stipulated discipline. That they're, are the most serious cases, the ones I think the community is most upset about, would not be available. And then there are categories that are eligible. And if you scroll down a little bit, and I underline these rather than bolding them because we may not want to follow this, but I want to get into those details on Saturday. But just so you know, there's a list of what is available for. All right, so let's switch back now to the other document, and we'll get, and you all have access to these documents. If it's time to read them between now and Saturday, great. Otherwise, to the extent possible, I want to work through this so everybody understands what we're doing. So when we present to the rest of the commission, they agree. So the stipulated discipline said to expedite the process, officers can admit to misconduct and accept the proposed discipline. To prevent abuse of this provision, guidelines allow the board to investigate the incident when appropriate. My co-chair, Michelle Wesley, do you have something to add? Oh, you're muted.
I'm just glad you clarified that. That makes all the difference.
Anybody else have something to add, subtract, concerns? Okay, let's move on to determination or find.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Staff has something to say. Their hand is up.
Yeah, just to clarify, there were this was something that got discussed, and as Commissioner and Co-Chair Dan pointed out, did not end up in the final document. And the area of disagreement was not, and this is it was not necessarily around the stipulated discipline component of it, but the component that relates to the act of admission leading to a different level of discipline, and usually a lower level of discipline, was also one of the things that came up. So although the commission did not end up on any text, there was a conversation that may be valid to revisit, where there was quite a bit of support expressed as well for the idea that where there is a set amount of discipline for a set type of misconduct, that admission to that would yield that misconduct and save the time of everybody really involved, as Co-Chair Dan pointed out. And so
Right, well, would you type that in there at the bottom of Q11?
Sure. And feel free to move on to the next thing if you can see both on the same time.
Yeah, so the determination section. So this is called findings. Determination is just a language that came from the documents that we had. The process to determine the validity of the allegations and applying the preponderance of the evidence standard. And we have defined that somewhere. Preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not that it happened, 50% plus one of the evidence. So Q3, this is from other jurisdictions, the oversight body may dismiss cases in limited situations defined by law. And we're starting with dismissal because that is an outcome. And there may be cases where in San Francisco, it says it's outside the jurisdiction, or if the complainant withdraws the complaint. So those are kind of things that get dismissed. Again, when we look at the IPR document later, there are a number of reasons they're allowed to dismiss complaints now. And I want to talk about that when we get to that. Okay, Q4 says findings are determined by the preponderance of the evidence standard, which I just described a second ago. And underneath this are the definitions of the other kinds of standards of review that are available, at least some of them. I don't think it's exhaustive. Okay, if you can scroll down a little bit more. I know you're still trying to type that thing. All right. Well, are you done with typing that thing in? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so let's scroll down to experts E2, which I see poking its head out there. E2, expert says the oversight body should use the preponderance of the evidence standard, not the reasonable person standard, because it's easier to understand and makes more sense. Does anybody have any questions about that or comments? I'm starting to start with that co-chair again, Co-Chair Michelle Wesley. If you have anything, anybody else have stuff to add, subtract? By the way, spoiler alert, what we're planning to do on Saturday when we split it into 2 parts is divide this up between the investigation and intake part and the findings and discipline part. And I'm going to assign this part to whichever group that Commissioner Iona is in, because I know she's really excited about defining those 4 findings. So, okay, does anybody else have anything to add on this? No, okay. Am I right? Facilitator Ayamide?
You are,
okay.
yes, yeah.
Let's scroll on down. Possible findings. So this is the list of the possible findings. That's really what I was just joking about, quasi-joking about. Basically, they're all the 4 same findings in the other jurisdictions. It's just different words. Some of them might be easier to understand what they mean. Let's scroll down to experts F1, where it was also proposed to use the 4 standard findings. So the experts agreed that those 4 findings are appropriate. And then Q2 says that you can add to those 4 findings additional findings, which may, so the Luna Fireball, there's actually the transition between the experts F1 and in this Q2. So the second thing on the Luna Fireball also contemplates these findings that aren't about the officer's behavior, but rather about the policy, the training, the supervisors that were involved, and you know, other possible reasons that the incident happened that wasn't necessarily misconduct. And then in the outcomes document, I guess we should probably put a hard carry return there too. The current system has capacity for other outcomes like supervisory investigations. All right, so this is a huge concept. It was 2 minutes before I want to go to break, but it says here, beyond discipline or corrective action for the subject officer, the current system has supervisory investigations for low-level complaints which cannot lead to officer discipline. And this is something that whichever group does this findings section will need to contemplate. And if you want to weigh in now before our break about what you think about this. So the idea is, like, let's say that the officer did something really minor, like it was a real minor thing of rudeness where they didn't open the police car door fast enough for somebody to get out or something like that. But it was what the city terms customer service, but I don't think people are customers of the police. You know, they're in custody by the police. But it's not something that they could get fired for or get time off for. So the worst they would get would be a letter, a command counseling. They'd talk to you by their supervisor. We want the new system to have something like that, that is not a full investigation, so that the investigators and the board can focus on the more serious cases. That's a question. I don't have an answer to it, but just so you know, that's something that happens right now in Portland. So to review, this section talks about the findings, additional findings, and the possibility of findings that are not going to lead to discipline. Maybe have anything to add, starting with co-chair Michelle Wesley.
I do have some thoughts about that, but I think cops investigating cops again, so I don't know.
It doesn't have to be. I just want to point out, you know, because it's called a supervisory investigation, and that's how it's done now. It could still be done by some review board, right? But it just wouldn't be like a full investigation and it wouldn't necessarily go to the board, but it might. We have to figure out what it would look like.
Yeah, I don't know, just question mark.
Okay, good. Commissioner Iona.
So my only thought about this is, I kind of get that sometimes you have to manage your workload through these kinds of techniques, but it seems like this would be more acceptable if you had really kind of like quarterly reporting on the cases that fell into this category with a description and then what happened. And I mean, whether or not you include names or not, you know, I don't know the answer to that, but that seems like that might be a good compromise if you actually knew exactly what they were about and what the outcome was. And then you save the whole investigation part of it. So just my 2 cents for now.
Okay, that sounds good. I see the staff has added that. All right, does anybody else have anything else on this topic before we go to, I hope that's okay, facilitator Ayamide, before we go to a break?
I don't see anybody. Everybody looks like they're ready for a break.
Yeah, so I think we should do a little 5-minute break here and come on back whenever you tell me what time. I don't know what the official time is.
The official time is 8:07. So that would be
8:12?
yeah, 8:12, yeah.
Groovy.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Back. All right. Oh, Co-Chair Commissioner Dan, would you like to continue?
As I unmute my phone. Sure. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. So we're just going to kind of continue. We've got several more pages to get through, but I think we can do it if we continue the way we just started. And I think that we're on, if I'm not mistaken, I think we're on page 8 of 14, which means we're more than halfway through. The next section talks about public hearings, and some of this is going to be stuff that we can't answer questions about how they're going to look because there may be legal complications we need to ask lawyers about. But Q8 from other jurisdictions. The hearings process has accommodations to ensure accessibility for complainants. So it talks about having a representative and having interpreters. And G2, also from jurisdictions, oversight agency holds evidentiary hearings on misconduct complaints and public investigative reports. So again, without getting too much into the weeds, the current system, up until the appeal, nothing happens in the public right now. But in there can be open evidentiary hearings. G6 says hearings on individual cases are generally open to the public with limited specific exceptions defined by the law. Q10 says the oversight body can take interim steps prior to findings being determined in specific cases, and that's kind of vague language, but basically in New York they can do 2 things. They can expedite a case if an officer is about to retire or be promoted, and they can suspend an officer while they're investigating the case. The oversight body can create panels to hear cases and determine violations of policy findings. I am again going to editorialize here that the Citizen Review Committee became overwhelmed with cases a couple of years ago and made it possible that they could break up, they have 11 members, that they could break up into panels of 5 or 7 people so they could hear more cases. They never ended up doing it, but their quorum is such that they can do that. So actually, maybe we should put that here in as a side note, that Citizen Review Committee contemplated, had the authority to do this, but has never done it here in Portland. So, the details here are basically about the other cities and how big these panels are, and whether, and one of the questions we raised in the research phase is whether these are going to be diverse enough if the panel's too small. Can and panel groups, but it's not necessarily. Okay. Q9 is hearings have consistent procedures. Again, like the investigative phase, this kind of just says this is what you have to do to hold a hearing. Bring in these documents, bring in these witnesses. And then under Portland, in the current system, transparency, it says CRC appeals hearings are held in public and allow for community input. And again, a little historical note, CRC has always allowed for public input during the hearings, the appeal hearings, and the city tried to take those away, and the CRC went to City Council and said, we value the community's input when we're holding these hearings, please don't take that away, and the city put it in the city code. So that's an important historical note. Does anybody have any questions about the procedures that are listed here for holding hearings about the misconduct incidents / complaints as listed here? Starting with my co-chair, I see a shaking head. Anybody else have anything to add? And I don't know if Commissioner McDowell's back or not because they're not on the screen, but welcome. Okay. Do you have anything to add? No. Okay. Thank you. All right. So let's scroll on to the next one, which is providing information to complainants and officers. The first section was about the intake and investigation, and this part is about the hearing. We didn't talk about the officers above. I just realized that, so maybe we make a note to contemplate how to inform the officers during the investigation phase. This Q7 from other jurisdictions, information is distributed before the hearing, and the oversight body communicates. Q5, the oversight body communicates the findings to the complainant. If you take a quick look at that, how that works in those other cities, if there's anything you want to add, subtract, question, I'm going to again start with my co-chair. Anybody else on the subcommittee have any comments about this? All right, so staff, before we go on to the discipline phase, can you just scroll up?
Commissioner Christian actually has comment.
Go ahead. While you're commenting on that, staff, can you just add something where it says informing the complainant about the status of their case? Make a little notes, remind us that we have to tell the officer what's going on too. Sorry, Commissioner Oriana Bauer, go ahead.
Same comment as before, just that the language in here tends to lean towards pre-digital means of communication. I mostly saw just letters in there, so we just note to update that in the future.
Okay. Okay. Maybe I'll make a note to myself, and we can add that later, since you're not finding it that quickly. Okay. Oh, there it is.
My comment too, I feel like maybe we could just make a general note for the whole document. No, it's not on every single thing, because it seems like it comes up a few times. Yeah, I don't know if that would be helpful as well. Yeah.
Wait, what is your comment for the whole document?
Oh, to update the language to fit more means of communication, like from text to email to whatever, like that one when they were talking about specifically the one that was talking about providing the information back to the complainant. I think a lot of it said it leads to a letter written to the complainant, but there's nothing in there about an email or a phone call or whatever. Good,
great, thank you. And then, does anybody else have anything to add on this before we roll on down to the next big section of discipline? Wow, that'll be section 4. We're trying to finish this by 8:25 though, so I'll talk as fast as I can. No. All right. Let's go with discipline. How to impose discipline. Jurisdictions, section P. The oversight body has the final say on the minimum level of discipline. Interesting. And so that talks about Oakland, and then if you scroll down, we have counterexamples where the board didn't have the final say, but according to the charter, this board will have final say. P2, other jurisdictions, police leadership may deviate upward from discipline, but not downwards. And I don't really know how that would apply to this board, but it may be something for us to contemplate. Does anybody have anything right now to say about this discipline section at this part of the discipline question? Starting with my co-chair again. No. All right. Are we okay? Let's move on to the next part, which is due process and just cause rules. Now, and application of the discipline guide. So we didn't paste anything in here about due process and just cause rules. I'd just like to flag that, if we can just put a note under that, we need to talk about the Loudermill hearing. And I just, on a fictional TV show, I heard the word Liebarger case, which is it's a similar Supreme Court case that gives people due rights. Right, and arbitration. Thank you, staff. And I believe, I don't remember if the civil, can't even remember the name of it, but a board for employees applies here or not either. You know what I'm talking about? Anybody?
Civil service. Is that
Civil
right?
Service Board. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, just put Civil Service Board as a little note here. It may show up somewhere else later in the document, but is anything else that we should flag for due process? I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, application of discipline guide P3 from other jurisdictions. There is defined discipline matrix, including defined options for discipline or corrective action applicable to the same jurisdiction as the oversight body, with limited flexibility for application to individual cases. And there's a lot we could talk about what's going on in the state of Oregon right now. We do have a discipline guide in Portland, and there's one that's for the state. Does anybody have anything, Commissioner Co-Chair Michelle Wesley, do you want to start? Do you have anything to add about applying the discipline guide? Anybody else? Not hearing anything. Let's go on. Okay, we're on to appeals. All right, so this is the first of the options that we assigned ourselves because it wasn't in the language of our previous documents. Appeal process. Will police and community members be allowed to appeal their cases, and or can the oversight board reopen cases? So under police Portland review and rigor in the current system document, current system offers multiple points of review and where you can send it back for more investigation, for instance, and have an appeal. K1 from other jurisdictions, police officers can appeal the findings or the dismissal of a case. I'm not sure why an officer would do that. K2, a complainant may appeal findings and or dismissal or decision not to investigate. K3, the oversight body has independent authority to reopen cases. K4, appeals are heard by the oversight body. K5, ponderance of the evidence is a standard used on appeals. Okay, Co-Chair Michelle Wesley, do you have anything for that section about appeals? Oh, okay. Any other members of the subcommittee? And I want to acknowledge, by the way, there were a couple of questions or comments that came in the Q&A, and I'm hoping to get Commissioner Renaud to explain the second one. Because it doesn't say exactly what we're talking about. Okay, so let's scroll on down then now, since nobody has a comment, to whether or not City Council will have a role in appeals. So in San Diego County, the Board of Supervisors, which is like the equivalent of City Council, can send a case back. Now, right now, City Council doesn't have any role described in the investigations in the charter. This is just something to bear in mind, that the current system allows City Council to have an appeal, a role in the appeals, and it's something we might want to flag for a plan B, what I was talking about, where if for some reason it's found that the board is not allowed to have final say, should the City Council have a role. So can we put that in underneath the L1, contemplate if City Council should have a role if for some reason the board doesn't legally have the authority granted to it in the charter. Anybody else, again, starting with Co-Chair Michelle Wesley, have something to add to this section about the City Council role? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So you know what? The next section is the last one, mediation.
I just
see a
realized
thumbs
I was
up.
on mute too, and I was like saying, no.
Mediation options. So this is from other jurisdictions. V1, oversight body can conduct voluntary mediation between community members and law enforcement. And V2, mediation is offered in more minor cases, but not in more serious cases. The experts document in G1 says mediation should be offered in more minor cases, but not more serious cases. That language was deliberately made to reflect each other. V3, mediation is accessible and open to affected individuals. In some cases, people other than complainants. And that's something that whoever's going to be looking at this should contemplate. Mediation for V4, mediation for minor cases when successful can be an alternative to investigation. And in Portland, mediation, the system allows for voluntary mediation as an alternative to investigations for some complaints. And again, when we look at the code in a minute, you'll see that there are prohibited kinds of complaints that cannot go to mediation. So I'm going to look at my little timeline that I made about how long I thought all the parts of this were going to take. Does anybody have anything to add about the mediation section while I'm looking at that?
I am not seeing anybody.
Okay, so can we look at the agenda again, because there's something in the discussion section that I didn't have flagged here. Okay, so reports back from so the reports back content, is if you read these documents on your own and you had something that you wanted to add here, so feel free to do that. And discussions for inclusion in the areas of agreement. And it feels like nobody was really objecting to any of this. We've added some things. So on Saturday, as I said, our plan is to break into 2 work groups, which means that whoever's working on the intake and investigation will now be able to take those ideas that everybody here was able to put in so that we can put that together. And then whoever's working on the other 2 sections about outcomes and discipline can take those in. And then the mediation and appeals sections, we're thinking about, hoping that we'll get to those on Saturday. And if we don't, roll those over maybe to the next meeting, or do work, individual work sessions in between meetings. Commissioner Co-Chair Michelle Wesley, did I forget anything from our little game plan here? I don't think so. I'm going to pull up my copy of the agenda because we have a minute left. If anybody has anything else they want to discuss about that document we just went through, or other ideas to put forward before the work session.
It's looking like you made time. Co-chair Handelman. I don't think. Oh, Catherine McDowell, Commissioner McDowell.
Thank you. I just had a quick question. Well, I had just a couple of questions. First of all, on Saturday, is the idea we would take the sections of the document that were assigned and kind of meld all this information into a set of recommendations for this particular, for our recommendations for this oversight commission. Is that the idea?
Right. The subcommittee will take the work that's being done in our breakout room Saturday, and we'll forward them in some form or other to the whole commission once we vote on it. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself in the agenda here, but we want to start out in a big room, kind of review what we did, put any extra notes that come in between now and then into the record, break into the subgroups, come back, do like an hour's worth of work, come back and talk about if we came up with anything else that we need to discuss together, and then go back to the work groups, and then come back again at the end with a wrap up where we're all together. Does that make sense? Yeah. That way we can double the amount of work we get done, but we're all still working together and collaborating and having input into it.
So my second question was this is just to me trying to frame this all, that currently what we're referring here as findings is what happens in the PRB, or maybe for lower level issues just kind of by a supervisor. Is that where the findings are made currently?
Yeah. Okay, how much time do you have?
I'm just
Well,
roughly trying to figure out, because we have a whole lot on the findings and hearing process, and it feels like there isn't really an analog in our current system.
Well, the findings section, a lot of the findings section just has to do with what the definitions are. The way things work here right now, and again, this is why we're going to be looking at this code now, but the way things work right now, and it's not even really that clear in the code, is that the officer's commander is given the investigation by either IPR or IA, depending who did it. And then it comes with a recommendation from one of those bodies. And then the commander can make their own finding based on what's recommended. And the findings can be one of those 4 findings.
Okay.
That's in a regular investigation. The supervisor investigation, don't get me started. But the supervisory investigations only have 2 findings. One is substantiated, and one is unsubstantiated. Why it's different from the other one, I don't know. And then the third kind of case with outcomes is a deadly force case, where the findings are either in policy or out of policy. For those of you who are going to be working on the findings, I think we should contemplate that the findings should be the same no matter what the investigation is, whether it's a minor complaint or a major complaint. So that's my opinion. I'm putting my opinion on the table on that one because it's something that's rubbed me the wrong way for a very long time in the current system.
Thank you.
Okay, does anybody else have any other questions before we go start looking at the IPR documents and the PRB? I want to start with the IPR because it's more complicated, but we should be able. Again, we're going to just kind of do the highlights tonight, and then I'm hoping that I'll have time and then go over with co-chair Michelle Wesley or a volunteer between now and Saturday to integrate this into the other document. And I should add that Commissioner Aiken, who's in the audience tonight, volunteered to help us out if we need it. So I might tap into that. And I've mentioned earlier that Commissioner Renault, who's also here in the audience tonight, has offered that as well. So bear that in mind as we move forward. Okay, are we ready? Are people ready to look at the IPR ordinance or code, city code? Sorry, I keep saying ordinance. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, looks like people are.
Great, so staff, you can bring that up. Wow, it's got its own intro slide. Have you shared the screen? Okay, so just before we get running through this document, I don't know how many of you had time to look at it, but at the top I put a legend. It says bold, which means it relates to the new board, except for the title. And then if it's underlined, only underlined means it could be used for the board. It's, in other words, it's not something that's in the charter per se, but it might be something that we want to contemplate. If it's underlined and bolded, we want to highlight for this committee or for another committee. And if it's underlined and italic, it could be used for other subcommittees. And staff has their hand up.
Yeah, so just to clarify for the public as well as for any subcommittee members, one of the tasks of the commission is to determine which portions of current city code related to officer accountability should be maintained. And so I think it may be helpful to consider that, could be used is possibly another way of interpreting that is could be maintained and retained is actually probably the better word there. Is that accurate? Or I don't want to narrow it too much, but I know that's at least one way to interpret it. Co-Chair Dan.
I think that's accurate. I just want to also make it clear that there are people in the city, and the language of the charter amendment itself said we want to start with a whole new thing. So there's maybe some people who are reluctant to put anything in there from the old code, but I think there's no reason for us to reinvent the wheel in some cases. Like there's some things that are going to happen no matter what kind of system you have, and that's part of what we just walked through that we found from our research. All right, so let's scroll down to the first bolded place because all this other stuff is underlined optional, and I'll let you read that on your own time. Okay, so here, and again, these numbers that you see, I had a problem when we copied it, when Commissioner Co-Chair Michelle Wesley and I were working on this, when I copied and pasted it, so those numbers don't really mean anything, but there's different sections. The thing at the top, which is powers and duties of IPR, that's the thing to make note of, 3.21. Yeah. So I'm going to read the bolded part. In performing these duties, IPR or the board shall have access to bureau data and records, including but not limited to raw data tabulated summary statistics, other source materials, and any necessary to perform its duties, direct access to an original database sources as permitted by state and federal law. This a lot has to do with the access to information subcommittee, but as we're contemplating how an investigation gets done, we might need to describe this access, right? So even if we don't figure out how it's going to get done, which that's their problem, I'm on that subcommittee too, so I highlighted that. Then we so initiate, monitor, and conduct investigations. So I'm not going to read every word. So scroll down to communicate with complainants. We talked about that a little bit. Arrange for hearings and appeals. Evaluate complaint information to make recommendations. Now again, that's underlined because that's the structural oversight committee is talking about recommendations. But when we're talking about what happens during an investigation or hearing, if the investigators or the board have recommendations, we might want to put that into our subcommittee work as well, right? Then there's a whole section down here, literally called access information, which is the name of the other group. So this, that's, again, the same comment I made before. It's the other group may work on it, but we might want to put it in our document. There's the highlighted thing that I mentioned before. The director may not levy fees for submission or investigation of complaints. Conducting investigative reviews of your employees, and that employees have to be truthful, professional, and courteous in their interactions with, the board, we'll say. And they can't impede or interfere with the filing, investigation, or adjudication of a complaint. That may be something we want to carry over. And the director may retain or employ independent legal counsel. I don't know where that might fit into our flow chart, but it's just something that we want to think about. And it definitely is going to come up in the structure in the section in the next phase. All right, scroll down if you would to the next bold down here. This is what the Citizen Review Committee can do. We've heard from the Citizen Review Committee, that's the current board that hears appeals. They hold hearings of complainant or member appeals. And, we kind of glossed over it, but here in Portland right now, if there's a sustained complaint against an officer, they can file an appeal. In fact, there was one case where there's a complaint that was sustained. The finding was, let's say, insufficient evidence, and the officer appealed that because they didn't want to have any anything on their record that implied that what happened. So that was an unusual case, but that has happened as well. So who gets to file an appeal? All right, let's scroll on. Next bold. Director, so this is from intake, again, one of the sections that we're working on. Director shall receive complaints from any source, it says. Make reasonable accommodations. They can't come to the office. Allegations of excessive force. And this is part of the DOJ grant. Allegations of excessive force shall be subject to a full and complete investigations unless there's clear and convincing evidence, and that's defined in those the definitions that we looked at very briefly before. To IPR, the allegation has no basis in fact. So that's mandated by the DOJ agreement. So we might want to flag that as something that we have to keep in. And then, okay, so here's where things get a little confusing. Complaints of member being a member of the police bureau will be investigated as either a formal administrative investigation, that's listed there as number 4, and then confusingly there's a number 6 later on that says or supervisory investigation. Okay, this is going to read the underline. So that's the supervisory investigation I talked about before, where it can't result in discipline because it's so minor. Right. Then this is a really important thing. Number 6, it says the director will be notified in a timely manner by either the assistant chief of investigation. Well, it's not so important who, but somebody in the bureau, upon their knowledge that the member has engaged in conduct that may be subject to criminal or administrative investigation. This was added because I don't know how many of you were around when Chief O'Day was around and he accidentally shot a friend of his on a hunting trip, but they didn't report it right away, and so the investigation didn't get started. So that's something to contemplate leaving in. The next thing is an underline and bold. If a complaint doesn't allege member misconduct but raises issues of broader systemic nature, IPR can conduct reviews of policies. So this kind of goes to the systemic review subcommittee. Okay, director can develop procedures for handling complaints and appeals when there's litigation. Okay, so this is something I really want to flag. It came up in another subcommittee to talk to a civil rights attorney, and I think that might be a good idea for us to at least contact a civil rights attorney to ask them what would make it so that you're comfortable having your client file a complaint at the same time you're suing the city. Because a lot of them don't want to do it so that there's not two parallel investigations and their client doesn't say one thing in the civil case and another thing to the investigators. So I think it would be good for us to do that. I'm not sure procedurally, staff, how to deal with that. I do know several people, including the person whose name was brought up at the last meeting, and I would actually like to have that conversation. If is the subcommittee comfortable with me making that contact, and staff, is that legitimate for me to call that person?
You to answer the question, you're referring to the attorney that was mentioned by name?
Yes.
Yeah. Welcome the the contribution to that scheduling process.
Okay.
Yeah. Happy to also take it on whatever you prefer, but if you want to take it on, happy to just
Yeah.
BCC it.
So just as a time check, what page are we on in that document out of how many pages? I don't have it pulled up over here. Staff?
Yeah.
Sorry, was muted. 6 out of 15.
Okay, so we're gonna have to go much faster. All right, so the next thing is about retaliation, that retaliation is not allowed. Then we have mediation. Okay, scroll on down. Then, okay, so this is the part that I thought we were getting to before. These complaint types, they have 1, 2, and 3. And in reality, these are different kinds of complaints, but we are, I sort of mentioned the idea that maybe all complaints should be handled the same way. So one is community member complaints when there's a community member involved. Another is no community members, bureau on bureau. That's the thing that, contemplating whether internal affairs is needed. And 3 is the ones that are initiated by the director at their discretion. And then number 4 is when bureau supervisors generate complaints about poor member performance or work rule violations. We haven't talked about that at all. And is that more of a thing where, somebody's supervisor should be worried about when somebody shows up late to work over and over? Is that something we want the investigators from this board investigating? I don't know, something to kick over to the next discussion. All right, scroll down a little bit. The next part just kind of describes the steps that are taken, and we have a whole section on that, but we can maybe copy and paste some of the stuff from here. And I didn't highlight a lot of this because a lot of it's redundant and not needed because it's talking about internal affairs. So scroll on down. IPR independent investigations, that I left most of this bolded because we're talking about having the civilian board do the investigations, not internal affairs. Then Commissioner Oriana Bauer, there's a referral here, right? So you're talking about what happens when it's not necessarily a complaint that can be investigated. That's something that is contemplated in the current system. And then the reasons for closing a case, I talked about that before. This is in city code. These are the current reasons they can close complaints. And we'll integrate this into the document before Saturday. All right, scroll on down if you would. Staff, what you got?
Just a question, because I can't scroll up to where the underline is. Administrative closure, is that something you find as a possible or for another subcommittee?
That's a possible outcome. So yeah, that's
okay.
for us.
So okay.
It would be bold if it was for another subcommittee.
Got it. Thank you.
And so all this is duplicative. That's why we're not seeing adequacy investigation. So this allows, right now, it allows the director of IPR to send something back if there wasn't sufficient investigation. And it's something that we might want to think about letting the board do. CRC can do that right now, and the police review board can do it right now. So, if the investigation isn't thorough enough, sending it back. Okay, scroll on down. Notification of appeals, that's, you notify the complainant and the officer that they have the right to appeal. Okay, scroll on down. Any complaint who's dissatisfied can request, they call it a review, it's an appeal, and there's some details about that. We don't have to get into those right now. Scrolling down. A case file review. Okay, we haven't talked about this at all, I don't think. Talked with co-chair Michelle Wesley about this. Okay, so being very brief, because we got to get to public input soon. A case file review is what Citizen Review Committee uses to determine whether or not the investigation was adequate. So that they don't call in the officer and the complainant and all the witnesses and everybody to get ready for a hearing if the investigation is not thorough enough for them to have a hearing. So there's a step in there to make it so that they can determine that. It's something we might want to include. I don't know whether we want to include it or not, but it has been helpful in the current system. And the committee can direct further investigation. That ability to request for, to ask for direct additional investigation comes from the DOJ agreement. So, okay. So then I'm just going to look at the thing that says, committee agrees to further investigation. The committee will then go to an appeal hearing. And this describes what happens at the appeal hearings, and it's a lot of details that aren't that important. So scroll on down. They can recommend further investigation at the appeal hearing. And okay, next page. Or they can, and this talks about what documents they have access to in the appeal. And we don't know right now whether we're talking about having the same people who heard the original case hear the appeal, if we're going to have another complete other body that's underneath the auspices of the board that hears appeals, or if just some subset of the board will hear appeals. So that's something to think about when we're talking about appeals. I know there's a lot of things, right? We're going to get this done in 4 meetings, folks. Okay, scroll on down. 5 meetings. 5 meetings. We have Saturday. Yeah, a lot of underlines there. So this has to do with bureau employees being compelled, and this some of this is access to information, but it's important to us that the investigators read a statement. The employee has to apply and truthfully answer questions, or else they could be subject to dismissal. So that's the compelling officer testimony. Maybe have any broad questions about what I just ran through very quickly. Again, so we're each work session can go into more details on this, and we'll incorporate this into the document. I'm hoping well before Saturday. Samir, up staff.
Yeah, just if you could explain, Commissioner Co-Chair Dan, if for everyone, the difference between a case file review and what was described as an audit in the fact-finding phase documents.
Well, the case file review is part of the investigation still. So the audit is after the thing is closed. So the case file review is before they go to the hearing. They look at the investigation and say, there's enough information for us to go forward with this hearing. Or, hey, you know what? You got to go back and interview this witness that you didn't interview, or else we can't do this case. That make sense?
Thanks.
Commissioner Iona.
Just to add, one of the things through the settlement agreement was that the DOJ gave the Citizen Review Committee the authority to request, not to request, but to actually, ask for more investigation. They get one time, they get to do it once, and they have to do, follow up the internal affairs or IPR.
Yeah, I did mention that. Okay, so here's the thing. This is where I think we should be talking about next steps. We've done some of that already. I'd like to at least scroll through the Police Review Board and just look at the highlights of that, if that's okay. Let's say 3 minutes maximum. So a similar legend at the top. The review board looks at incidents, specific incidents, and it lists some of the specific kinds of cases they're going to look at. Scroll on down. We have not talked about this. There are sworn officers who are on probation for the first 18 months, and the Bureau can let them go while the investigation is going on, but they this code allows the investigation to continue even if the person is no longer employed, okay? So that's just something to bear in mind, that that's already in city code. They can make policy recommendations and training recommendations. That's part of the other work group, but that's also something that we have talked about. Scroll on down. A lot of this just is affirming things that we've already seen. It talks about how many members there are on the review board, which will, that's something we'll talk about too later on. Those underlines. Okay, so recommended findings. So this, those findings will be written down, explaining their vote, and it also includes a statement with a minority point of view, at which I think, I'm hoping people agree is an important idea, that if it wasn't unanimous, that the people who didn't prevail can at least have their voice heard, even if they didn't win. All right, scrolling down. So stipulated findings and discipline, we looked at this section earlier, so I'm not going to go over it again. Oh, look at that. Whew, I did it in 2 minutes. Maybe we have questions or comments about the police review board. And again, it's just like there may be parts of this that we want to lift and use in our, and we're not writing code, we're just writing the broad ideas of what's going to be in the code, but we could include the language from the code when we're forwarding it to the commission.
It doesn't look like there's any questions.
I don't see any questions either. So then before the public comment, we have this next steps thing. So here's co-chair Michelle Wesley. Will you support me in this? We thought about assigning people to the two different tiers I was talking about, the intake and investigations and the findings and discipline sections. And if people don't like this idea, it's fine. I was thinking about people's levels of experience and kind of just what would make a good working group. It turned out to be kind of gender-based, but I didn't mean it to be that way. The idea would be that Commissioner Oriana Bauer and I would work on the intake and investigations, and then Commissioners McDowell, Iona, and Michelle Wesley would work on the findings and discipline sections. Is that okay? Because yeah, it seems like there's, we got the legal mind from Commissioner McDowell and the experience of Commissioner Iona and the community experience of Commissioner Michelle Wesley, and Commissioner Oriana Bowers disappeared. No, you're okay working with me? Okay, good. So that's our plan. So we can't break into like two out of the three of us can talk to each other between now and then, but the three people who are working together, you can't talk to each other without becoming a public meeting, because that becomes a quorum of the subcommittee. So if you want to do any pre-work and you want to communicate with each other between now and then, we'll figure out a way to make that happen.
Thank you.
That make sense? Great.
Yep. Okay.
Turning it back to
I think staff has a question first, and then we'll go to public comment.
Just a clarification, if you want to talk about anything, you can't deliberate on things, but if you want to like coordinate a meeting of two of you via email, that is allowable, just to clarify.
Thank you.
Thank you, staff. Okay, we're going to public comment. We'll now take a public comment on the issues the PAC is discussing. Our community members can tell their story about policing and police accountability. We ask members of the public to keep their comments or questions to 2 minutes in length. Raise your hand in Zoom if you'd like to speak. Okay, it looks like Raquel Silver and Faith.
It's Rochelle, but
Rochelle, thank you.
yeah.
I was going to actually ask if it was Rochelle or Raquel. So
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
So you were going really fast, but somewhere near the top, there was a section about what material you were going to give back to the complainant. And in that, there was a release of medical information. And I would just caution you to be a little sensitive about that. You don't need a general release of medical information. And that may make the complainant want to run the other way. You may need medical information about the incident at hand, but you don't need their whole history. So I just ask you to be a little sensitive. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. And I see Faith has raised their hand.
Hi, good evening.
Commissioner Faith. Okay.
Hello, this is Faith Aiken. I'm a commissioner and not on the subcommittee, but thanks y'all for your hard work, and it was lovely to see you cruise along. Just one comment. In the beginning, you had chatted about a navigator, and one of the things that came to my mind, and I actually think my colleague Commissioner Renaud has mentioned this, is the need for really culturally specific or responsive navigators, particularly folks who have experience with mental illness or folks who have disabilities. And one thought for me is there are so many wonderful community organizations in Portland who have that experience. And I wonder if, and I think this is like so in the weeds, but I wonder if it's something that the board could be structured to have contractors like on call from some of our community partners to be able to be that navigator. So the board, or whatever form we have, sort of the intake place, and then a culturally appropriate or more appropriate navigator we could use as a contract with some of our key city partners. I'm thinking of like IRCO or Mental Health Alliance or NAMI, who have peer support specialists, and also folks who are trained as trauma-informed counselors. So just a thought that came to mind. Thank you all for your work.
Thank you, Commissioner Faith. At this time, there are no other Q&A things on the docket here. So thank you for your public comments. I guess at this point, we're going to go to the garden plot. So this is a time for facilitators, co-chairs, and staff to summarize any items already brought up today, which did not fit in today's agenda. We won't be using this time to add new items not previously mentioned or to discuss any items, but we will use the list to develop future agendas so these items can be addressed. So first, I just want to check to see if co-chairs had anything for the garden that was on the garden plot.
Yeah, well, I have just like notes to myself of things I need to do, which I'm going to follow up and see if I can get somebody to help me with the public comment that we've received, so we can integrate that before Saturday. And I'm going to try to reach out to attorney to ask about that one aspect of cases that have been filed. And another note to myself, Commissioner Co-Chair Michelle Wesley and I were going to ask in our prep meeting if we can open up the garden plot to the other commissioners, but I don't want to do that and upset the apple cart right now, but I just want to put that on the garden plot to open up the garden plot at future meetings.
Okay. Apple cart. Love it. Okay. Thank you, Co-Chair Commissioner Handelman. Staff, did you have any?
I mean, there's a lot of things in the document that are already noted, and you'll see the versions of that come out. I did want to mention to highlight one of them, which is just to check as to it's kind of a similar concept to Commissioner Faith's point in the public comment, but with relation to Co-Chair Charlie's comment about filing through a third-party organization, looking at if the same structure is possible. And I know Commissioner Faith mentioned it, and that we go to the garden plot, and this will be kind of the same concept. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I think that's pretty much one of the things that I had in the garden plot as well. Just the question of how this would be how an advocate would be culturally sensitive. And then I also put in there that maybe a possible briefing with like a 911 operator or like lines of crisis, just to maybe get an idea of what they're doing to help with these kind of situations. So that was one thing that I kind of heard a little bit on, and it sounded like someone might wanted to have asked questions. So that was something else I put there. But that's all I have. Okay. Okay, so I think this is our end time. Not too bad. Thank you. As a reminder, you can now submit advanced public comment to the Police Accountability Commission via web form, voicemail, or postal mail. To take a moment to read what is on the screen here.
And thank you to the people who submitted advanced public comment for today. It also gets posted as an item on the website as a document. So that commission members can read it, and then also it's visible broadly.
Thank you, staff. Thank you to all the members who attended today's meeting and for your contributions. Thank you also to the interpreters for supporting access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and its subcommittees for all Portlanders. Thank you to the public for their comments. And finally, thank you to them. Thank you for everyone for attending. And the next meeting of the subcommittee is a work session between, actually, should I say that yet? It's either going to be at 1 or 2. We're still finding that out. This Saturday at December 10th. The time is now 9:03 and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.